And welcome everyone to Trusts and Your Transaction. We've got our sales team on the line today, most of them, including Brad Fisher, Robin Albert, Linda Federico Johnson, Val Allen, and our super special guest speaker, Escrow Officer Stephanie Dimick. So without any further ado, I am going to start our screen share.
Robin, you're in the waiting room, so somebody joined as you.
I let myself in.
All right. Trusts in Your Transaction. We've got a short little commercial for you on a couple of our new products and services. So I am going to ask Linda Federico Johnson to share just a quick minute about these two products.
So Start In Here came out almost a year ago. In the last 6 months or so, there is now the Start In Here with the mobile deposit. So this is what your clients are going to get when they open escrow at Chicago Title, whether they're the buyer or the seller, and it allows them to put in their information securely. The more information they put in at the time of the start of it will make it easier along the way through the escrow, because we'll already have that information about them, as well as they can take a picture of the front and of their check. I believe it's the front and the back, right, Steph? And it will, as long as it's completely filled out, they can then through this system do their deposit as well. Their EMD can come in that way. So there's no waiting for somebody to drop it off, no handing it to somebody, no thinking it's going to get lost. They can do it right there. Now, of course, if they're afraid of that, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. So, but this is newer. So your clients will get it. Don't be alarmed, and tell them it is safe if they see it.
Thank you. And then for our realtors only right now.
Yes, lenders are not live yet on this one. So this is now in here. So this is now your portal as a real estate agent that you will get when the EMD is the first trigger. So once the EMD is in, a notification will go out to you and you will get the sign in notification for the first time. If you've never been on it or never had a transaction, that's your first call to action. You can download the app at any point in time, but nothing will be in there until you get that invite. And so that will come to you after the EMD is in. Now, if you pre-open your escrows, it will not come until until the buyer has been in service. We have a contract, live contract, and you may need to just remind the escrow officer in the beginning to send that out, because it is not coming out sometimes automatically if they forget. It's just they're used to working in their own mode. So sometimes it might get missed, but you can trigger that by saying, hey, I didn't get my Start In Here or my in here part. And so it's very easy to fix. So that allows you now to have all your escrow information in one spot, and it will work like a news feed. So you'll see notifications coming in as we get things. There's like 8 trigger points and things like that will allow you to see that information, and it never goes away. And there'll be some shared documents with you as well. So you can then share those later on. So the best example I can use is the closing statement. When it comes tax time, they always want that closing statement. Why wouldn't you print all your closing statements for all your people? And that's another touch you have for them in January. So it's a great thing. It'll be in here, and we look forward to seeing you in here.
And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. So Stephanie Dimick is going to lead us through our agenda today. But just to give you guys a little bit of an overview, we will cover the documents that we need for verification, who can sign as a buyer or a seller, rules regarding the Form 593 and 1099, how we disperse the funds, dealing with the deceased in a trust, and other challenges to closing. And as I mentioned earlier, finishing up with a Q&A to answer all of your questions. All right, Steph, take it away.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great Friday. So talking about trusts and what we deal with those in an escrow transaction. So first topic, why do people put properties in a trust? And they're doing that to avoid having to go to probate when one of the owners passes away or both of them. And then also to establish a clear succession plan for the real estate assets. If the house is being left to multiple children, then the trust can sell the property, the assets go to the bank, and then they get dispersed from there. One question I get asked a lot is, this person was in title, they passed away, but they have a will. Can we transfer property to who was supposed to get it according to the will? And the answer is no, that has to go to probate. So putting a property in a trust helps to avoid that step and save cost and time for having to deal with that transfer. When we see that a seller owns the property in the trust, we have to make sure that that is who our seller is. So when you go to a listing appointment, we recommend that you contact Gail Thomas in our customer service department, ask her to pull a property profile in the most recent grant deed to show how title's held. That way, if it's in a trust, you'll see that from the onset and be prepared to give your clients plenty of time to get the documents in order that are going to be needed for the escrow. It'll also help you to know if the person that you're meeting with is the current trustee of the trust that's listed on title, or if there's been a change of the trustee, which would require additional documents to be provided. One of the most common things that gets missed when people have a property in a trust for whatever reason is sometimes they forget to open a bank account in the name of the trust. And so if you're having that conversation with them from the beginning, oh, I see you own this property in your trust, want to just make sure that you also have a bank account established, because that's the way that we're going to pay the proceeds on the file. We're going to pay them to the trust because that's who the owner is. So if you're having that conversation with them from the beginning, it gives them plenty of time to get down to the bank and make sure that they have that open, rather than at closing, we give them a check and they have nowhere to deposit those funds. If you see there's a difference with the person that you're working with and who the owner of record is, you can call your escrow officer. We're happy to look at the grant deed, compare it to any trust documents that you're able to obtain. Maybe the original owner, the trustee of the trust, has diminished capacity, has been, diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, and they're, in a nursing home. So a child or the successor trustee is now signing on behalf of the trust. So we can help navigate looking at those documents before you get into escrow to find out exactly what's needed, so that you're prepared and prevent any delays. So we do run the statement of information for the individuals of the trust, which are the trustees, the original trustee. So if John Jones is trustee of the Jones Family Trust, we're going to run that name individually. So owning a property in a trust doesn't necessarily exclude it from having to deal with SI matters. So if that individual has liens or judgments against them, there's still going to be something that we would need to address and deal with in the escrow. We would not, however, need to run an SI for the successor trustee of the trust, because they're not really the owner. They're just the person that has the signing authority for the trust. So that is one difference. For your buyers, a lot of times buyers want to purchase a property in a trust, or they have a trust, they want to make sure it gets transferred. If they're a cash buyer, no no problem. We can vest them in the trust. They'll have to provide trust certification to us so that we can make sure who the trustees are that we put on the property. If they're getting a loan, it's something that they'll want to discuss with their lender early on. Some lenders will draw the loan documents in the name of a trust, but there's different guidelines for that. I think sometimes they'll have to verify that the trust has assets, so make sure that there's a bank account with those funds in the trust. What we cannot do, and we get asked this question a lot, is if the lender can't put the property in the buyer's trust and we close the escrow in their individual names, the title company can't, after it's closed, draw up a deed to put the property into the buyer's trust just because we know how and we know how to navigate that stuff. We have to comply with the lender's instructions and follow the way that they instructed title to be held. So we can't draw accommodation documents, things like that. So if they're not able to close in the trust, they'd have to go see a paralegal or a document preparation company, or they
Somebody muted. Wait,
I think I got muted.
you did for just a second. So just go back to where you got asked.
To draw a deed. Okay,
Yeah.
so we can't draw the deed because we have to match what the lender tells us to do if it was an individual name. So if they want to put the property into the trust afterwards, they'll have to go to a paralegal or a document preparation company, or better yet, go to the attorney that drew the trust for them and have them add that property to the trust, and then also record it, because they might want to add that to the trust documents as an asset as well. So might as well go back to the attorney that prepared everything to make sure it's all listed. So what documents do we need for verification? Well, it depends. It depends on who we're dealing with as the seller. If we're dealing with the original trustee, we just need their photo ID, and they're going to complete a trust certification for our file to verify that they're the current trustees of the trust. They're going to identify the tax ID number for the trust, which is oftentimes the social security number for one of the trustees. And then that's a document that we'll have notarized for the file. So simple if it's just the original trustees of the trust that are signing. If we're dealing with a successor trustee, then we're going to need to have actual copies of some of the trust documents. So we don't necessarily need the entire trust, nor do we really want it. There's certain situations where we'll ask for additional pages depending on the situation, but general rule of thumb is that the pages that we'll need are the cover page, or the page that identifies the name of the trust, the page that identifies the successor trustees, and then the signature and notary pages of the trust. And that'll be enough to let us know who has signing authority. Now, if we're dealing with a seller that is incapacitated and no longer able to sign on their own behalf, in that situation, we're going to be preparing and recording a change of trustee, and the trust is going to dictate what documents are required for that. A lot of trusts require only one doctor's note to verify that the signer is no longer able to execute documents. Some trusts call for 2 doctor's notes. So if your escrow officer is asking for 2 doctor's notes, don't get mad at her. It's not her decision or choice. We're just following what the trust established and set up. The other document that we'll need if the original trustee is deceased is going to be the original death certificate. So that's something else to ask for. For the trust copies, get those to us as soon as you can. And the reason for that is if you met with, say, one of the seller's kids, you met with the son, and he said, oh yeah, I have signing authority, I'm going to sign all of the documents. So he signs your listing agreement, your contract, and then is going to sign the escrow documents. Well, what if the trust documents actually named 2 successor trustees? It didn't say first this one, then that one. It said both kids are going to sign. Then we're going to need to go back and have that second person sign all of the documents. So it's a good idea to ask for those up front. And if you're not comfortable reading through the documents to identify who the signer is, just ask for copies and send them to your escrow officer before you open the escrow, and we'll be happy to review those and let you know who would be the person that we need to sign the documents for the file. Deeds of trust. Okay, so loans on the property. If the original trustees no longer there, and the successor trustees coming in to sell the property, sometimes they lack knowledge about old deeds of trust. We've all had files where there's an old loan that never got a reconveyance released for it. Makes it much more difficult to find the information to get that released if you're not dealing with the person that borrowed the money and has direct knowledge of when the loan was obtained, things like that. So it's good to watch for those on the prelim in case they pop up. That's something that you can also ask to have customer service check. Are there any open deeds of trust on this? So that you know before going into the escrow, if the son or daughter says there's only one loan on this property and customer service pulls 2 deeds of trust, then maybe we'll have more time to look into why that old deed of trust is on title. One that's common, old ones that pop up are old loans with private party beneficiaries. I have one on a file this week that funds were borrowed from the parents back in the 80s. In that situation, fortunately, they loaned the money in the name of the trust and still had a copy of the trust. So I have enough information to go back and use that to have the successor trustee sign the reconveyance for that old deed of trust. So it's something that comes up not just on the deed, but also on the loan side. If it is somebody that wasn't a family member, but it was a private loan and it's a super old one, then we can't find them, then another option to get that released is to get a lost note bond. But those can be expensive and take time, sometimes up to 30 days to get cleared. So better to know sooner than later if you have something that's going to cause a huge delay like that. Tax reporting requirements. All trusts are issued 1099s. So even if the individuals are the original trustees and they own the property in their trust and it was their primary residence, we still have to report the sale to the IRS because the trust owns the property. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they will or won't owe taxes. We just have to report the sale. So that's something to just make your clients aware of. Why did I get a 1099? Well, you own the property in the trust. The 593. So for the state withholding requirements, when this is completed, it's going to be completed with the trustees' social security numbers. And they're going to be, the information is going to be sent on their individual behalf. So a trust isn't automatically exempt from the state withholding. That still depends on if it was a primary residence, if there's a loss or zero gain. If a successor trustee is selling the home and it was the decedent's primary residence, there's a box to check for that so that it's exempt from the state withholding. But we do still have reporting requirements for 593. And just because a property is owned in a trust doesn't mean that it's exempt from that. I get asked that question a lot too. If the individual or the trust has a loss or zero gain, they can mark that box and then fill out the second page to demonstrate that there's a loss or zero gain on the sale. For that, I wanted to say one thing that does come up a lot is sometimes the property gets deeded to the heirs when the original trustee passes away. They'll take it back to the attorney and the attorney will go ahead and record the affidavit of death of trustee and then distribute the property to the heirs. In that situation, if the heirs got put into title and they're selling the property individually, then they would have to fill out the tax documents with their information rather than if the trust was selling it and then the trust is the entity that was going to get the tax forms. So that is something that comes up from time to time as well. Also, if those deeds were done outside of escrow, we're still going to have to get copies of the trust documents to verify that everything was transferred properly. So just because the property already got put into the individual's names doesn't mean that we won't still be asking for the trust documents. Disbursement of funds. I talked about this in the beginning, but it's important to make sure that the sellers have established a bank account in the name of the trust, because we're going to pay the funds payable to the trust at closing and not the individual. Some people think, oh, it's fine, my bank will take it, just wire the funds. They don't. They'll send it back to us, and some banks will deduct a wire fee. So anymore, we just really try to drive this home, make sure that the bank account is in the name of the trust so that the funds can be applied.
So I don't see any new questions in the chat, but at this time, if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask Stephanie a question about anything that we covered, this would be your opportunity to do that. Okay.
I guess
Stephanie.
all I would say to like end it is that this can feel complicated and there's a lot of details to it, but don't feel like you have to be the person that reviews the documents and figures out what's needed and who's going to sign what. But if you're comfortable enough just to ask your client for the copies and send them to your escrow officer, say, hey, I've got this listing coming up. Can you look through this and let me know what we're going to be needing? Then they'd be happy to do that, and then just let you know.
Great.
It was way too easy, Stephanie.
I talk fast.
Yeah, and again, it like Stephanie said, it can feel complicated, but it's really, you just have a few basic rules that have to be followed very carefully. So I guess if there are not any questions, that is going to conclude our class for today. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Maybe.
Since I can't